Hey everyone, welcome to Psychology with my wife.
I'm the wife.
And I'm the psychology student.
Welcome to episode 3.
Nice.
Yeah, 3 episodes in.
If this is your first episode with us, I'm going to go through some experiments, theories, and topics related to psychology, and I'm going to put them in simpler terms, and hopefully we can have a fun conversation.
Yeah, I get the really easy part of just sitting here listening to Julian discuss all of these interesting topics, and I ask him questions that I think will help me and maybe some folks who are listening to understand the topics a little bit better. But the fun part about this is I don't know what we're going to be talking about before we talk about it. So there's no pre-planning on my part, but yeah, hopefully it will be okay.
Slap it right in your face.
There were definitely a few times in episode number 1 and episode number 2 where I just looked at Julian and I was like, I don't know what you want me to say.
Deer in the headlights. I don't know.
He would say something and then he'd just stop talking and stare at me and I'd be like, I don't have a comment. I don't know what to say here. This is awkward. So I think most of those will probably be edited out of that episode, but you never know. Maybe we'll leave some in for fun.
I did ask you it was last episode, we were talking about the birds, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I asked her which birds can pass, or if birds can pass the marshmallow test of delayed gratification. And I said in that episode that pigeons were smart.
Yeah, I said I think that some birds could pass the test, but some birds, such as pigeons, are stupid and probably couldn't pass it. And then Julian came to their defense.
Yeah, I don't know why I was defending pigeons, but I was walking to school a couple days ago, and I was watching some pigeons, and there was...
As you do in downtown Toronto. That's all there is to do.
They're everywhere. There was like this flower pot kind of thing with a tree in it, and someone had poured a bunch of like cheesies in the top of it, and
feeding the soil again. Normal.
And some of them had dropped. I walked by there a little bit before. Some of them were on the ground and they were eating them, but then this time when I came around, they weren't. They were just walking around the flower pot, just like, oh, where's the cheesies? I'm a pigeon. But so I take it back. Pigeons aren't smart.
Okay. It's like, is this going somewhere? You're taking back your comment of defending the pigeons.
Redacted. I think that's the word.
Well, I think this week I feel like giving a shout out to another podcast that I am working on, that I actually interviewed Julian on that podcast as well. I'm assuming by the time we get around to uploading our own podcast, this podcast will be live, and it's called An Influential Generation, and it's a podcast based out of Lloydminster, where Julian and I are from, and it's basically just me. I'm only doing season 1 of it just to kind of get it started and off the ground, and then I'm gonna mentor some youth to take over for the future seasons. But during season 1, I just had some really informal conversations with different community members about their experiences with tobacco and vaping products. So we will have the links to that podcast down below if you are interested in listening to more of me and a little bit more of Julian in the first episode of that podcast.
Yeah, that was fun. That's what got us into this mode.
Yeah, we did that one, and then we had already been talking a little bit about potentially doing a podcast, and then we had so much fun working on that together, and
bought all our equipment like 4 days later.
Yeah, we did. We bought all our equipment while we were still in Alberta, and it all shipped to Toronto and arrived weeks before we arrived back. So, sorry, concierge.
Well, let's get into this episode today.
Yeah, let's do it.
Today, we're going to look at operant conditioning.
Okay. Let's do it. Yeah.
Besides being able to condition animals, it's actually got some real life practicality to it. You can use some of these tips here on conditioning to be effective and authentic leaders and be good parents.
Okay, those are all things I think are useful to learn.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like, it's operant conditioning, and I think when you first hear that word, it seems like you're like trying to control people, and
It
it's
feels very military. It's like,
Yeah.
are we going to be doing some drills here? What's going on?
but it's more so about how we create habits for ourselves, I guess, is
Okay.
the biggest one we'll learn about.
So it's like self-conditioning.
We're going to go through both self-conditioning and like how it's relevant to your when you're trying to create habits, as well as like if you're going to influence other people, like be an authentic person, you should act a certain way.
Okay. I like it. Let's dive in. I'm excited.
Yes. So it's a type of associative learning behavior that aims to modify behavior by either reinforcement or punishment. It uses external stimuli, meaning it's not from the person themselves, to predict and change the behavior of someone or something. But it's important to know that it's voluntary behavior. Classical conditioning is not voluntary.
Okay. But we're doing operant conditioning.
Yes. Yeah.
Are we going to be talking about classical conditioning in this episode too, or?
Not too much, because like that's a whole other thing.
Okay, so just creating that differentiation in case anyone out there is kind of familiar with classical conditioning. So
Yes.
they know.
Yeah.
This is different.
To quickly sum up classical conditioning, it's pairing of two behaviors. So you like purposely do that's like Pavlov's dogs.
Oh, okay, yeah. Do you want to expand on that a little? Because some people might not know what that means.
About
What it's referencing.
the dog salivating when he rang a bell.
Oh my goodness, this is going back to, again, episode... I don't even know. We've only had 2 episodes that I can't even remember. But one of our first 2 episodes, we talked about Jim and him trying to train Dwight.
Mm-hmm.
This seems to be like a common theme here. We're training people on this podcast.
Yeah, no, that's classical conditioning. But the father of operant conditioning is B.F. Skinner, and he was a researcher at the Harvard Psychology Department. He based some of his theories on from the theories proposed by a guy by the name of Edward Thorndike.
Okay.
Edward Thorndike created and coined the term the law of effect. And the law of effect is that actions that cause a satisfying effect are more likely to occur, whereas negative ones are less likely. Kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure. I guess it's basically suggesting, like, if you do this and good things happen, you'll keep doing this. Whereas if you do this and bad things happen, you'll hopefully stop doing that.
Yeah. He discovered this because he was putting cats in a puzzle box, and as the cats discovered how to get out in the preceding times, they would get out of the box faster.
So they were like building those memory pathways and stuff to...
Pretty much, yeah, I would say.
Well, we've already discussed in a previous episode again that cats are pretty smart.
Yes. Well, we questioned if they were, because we didn't know if they could pass the gratification test.
Well, I don't think we were questioning whether they were smart, though. We were just questioning whether they cared to wait. Or if they were just like satisfied with getting anything. If that makes sense. They're devious little things.
Yes. Well, they just randomly go off and smack you or something.
Yeah.
Skinner took Thorndike's law of effect and made it objectively studyable using the scientific method.
The scientific method.
Well, it's a big deal. You can't replicate it if you can't produce it in a proper way. But have you ever seen the meme of Mr. Bean looking over at someone else's paper?
Maybe.
And it's always like, so in this example, it would be Thorndike in front of the other guy's paper. It would have his name, and then it would be Skinner in front of Mr. Bean. And it would be him copying and writing down what it was.
Okay, I like it. We're going to find this meme and we'll put it into the video version on YouTube.
Yes. If we don't find it, we will create it.
Julian will create it. Also, plug to our YouTube. If you're listening to this as an audio version, check out our YouTube because we have a video version.
Nice. Yes. And you'll see what we look like. See if the voice matches the person. But did we talk about that before? How I like pictured?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think so.
That Josh guy.
Yeah.
His name. But Skinner's experiments started with a Skinner box. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love how people just always name things after themselves. Like, I don't blame them. Like, I guess if I created something really sick, I don't know. I don't think I'd name it after myself. I don't have my name isn't like nameable, if that makes sense. No one would want to buy something called the Gianna method or...
But
my last name is good. Well, my current last name, Maren.
Your new last name is going to be, well, potentially used. You could have like
the quick method.
Quick study. But I don't know if people would click on a quick study. It'd be like, oh.
The quick staddy.
Ah. Okay. That's good.
We're getting somewhere now.
This Skinner box. He used pigeons and rats to control the stimuli they were exposed to.
Okay.
So maybe there is, I'm still on this pigeon thing. They must have some type of intelligence. So.
Well, I think everything has some kind of intelligence, right? Like, so it's not that they're stupid in every aspect.
Or maybe this should just completely discredit his discovery.
Oh, yeah. That's what this podcast is doing. We're discrediting every famous researcher ever.
But he did find stuff out, so you can't discredit him.
Well, let me hear what he found out first.
Found 5 consequences of behavior. 2 things increase behavior. First one was positive reinforcement. Mm-hmm. That's what we talked about before. When you do something correct, you get a positive reward. An example of this would be like a performance raise at work. The second one is negative reinforcement. So, remove the negative stimuli when you do something correct. If that makes sense. It's different. It's not punishment. And people often get confused with that.
Yeah. Wait, so you're saying if you do something good, it's just that nothing bad happens? Or
they take away something, say, what would be an example here? Say if I was just tapping you in the forehead. Oh, have you ever done that? I don't know what they call it. But you tap someone on the forehead, it's like, name 5 chocolate bars, and I'll stop tapping you on the forehead.
I don't think so.
It's really hard because it's distracting.
Sounds like you're into some freaky stuff.
We'll try it after this episode.
Name 5 kinds of birds.
Pigeon, sterling, crow, raven, Ostrich.
Nice.
Or penguin. I should have said penguin.
Oh, wow. Missed it.
But yeah, it's removing something bad. And there is the factors that decrease behavior. So it's positive punishment. This is when you add a negative stimuli that you want to, of something you want to decrease.
But it's called positive punishment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they're termed this way because negative and positive reinforcement increase behavior, and punishment, there's two different kinds of punishment. So you got to separate them.
Okay.
And then negative punishment, which is you remove the reward when there's a bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fifth one is called extinction. And that is when the behavior is no longer associated with reinforcement or punishment. So,
so does that mean it's like a learned behavior? Like it's like, because you said this is about building habits.
Yes.
So if you reach level 5 extinction, that means you don't need any of these external factors to influence whether or not you'd continue to do it?
if it is resistant to extinction, if it's a high chance of being extinct, the behavior being extinct, then after you take away the reward or take away the punishment, they'll go back to what they were doing.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Sure.
The other half of his experiment looked at what's called reinforcement schedules. And for this one, there is also 4. There is 2 ratio schedules. The first one is called a fixed ratio schedule. So that means a response is reinforced after a specified number of responses. So, say after a dog does a certain behavior 4 times, you give them a treat, or every time kind of thing.
Okay.
And then the other one is variable ratio. So the response is reinforced after a random amount of responses. So that means you'll give the dog a treat every second time, and then maybe every 5th time, then another 3rd kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And so how many times are they doing these experiments? So like if they're doing it, every 5 times, are they running the experiment with that same dog 5 times or something? Like, are they doing it a consistent amount of times with each variable?
Yeah, like this experiment, like he had a lot of pigeons and rats that he was doing it to. And
why are we talking about dogs? Pigeons and rats?
I guess I could use that example instead. But I think there was, in the box, the Skinner box, there was like 2 switches.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they would light up. And it was, I think, a reward of some sort when they hit the one that lit up. And then sometimes the reward would only give them a treat some of the times they hit the red light, kind of thing, right?
Okay.
If that makes sense, which I hope it does. The third one is fixed interval schedule. So no matter what the rat does, after a certain amount of time, it gets a reward.
No matter what it does.
Yeah. So
Okay.
after 2 minutes, it gets a reward. Then the other one is the variable interval schedule, which is the same thing, random amount of times that you would get a reward. And so I was actually thinking about the fixed interval schedule. In the AIG podcast, we were talking about smoking, and at certain times of the day, I would have cravings to smoke.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In a way, that's a fixed interval schedule, because no matter what I did at that time, I would feel like smoking.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
So makes it harder to quit, I guess. Eh?
Yeah. We just watched this movie. I'm pretty sure I shouted this out in our last podcast too, but we watched Queen Pins recently, and that makes me think of one of the investigator, the coupon investigator. He had this fixed interval schedule. Every morning at 7 a.m. He woke up and he had to poop at 7 a.m. He had a poop alarm on his phone to make sure he was in a place where he could go poop. And there's a scene in the movie where he's not in a place where you would want to go poop, but it's not optional for him apparently.
What's the guy's name? Vince Vaughn?
The partner.
Yeah, the partner. Well, because they were in the car and he's like, do not poop in the car. This is not a place that you poop.
He pooped in the car.
Oh, at least it was a rental. Yeah, so I was talking about extinction before, and out of all of these, with the individual or animal, partial reinforcement is the most resistant to extinction. To me, that doesn't make sense, or I would assume it doesn't make sense, because I would think that full reinforcement would make the habit stronger because you do it more times, right?
Okay, something I want to clarify a little bit is the concept of extinction here. So is this referring to the extinction, or I don't like the term extinction here, but whatever. Is this saying that a good habit or a bad habit is
both?
Like, okay.
It's a removing of a good habit or a bad habit. And it's not purposefully. It's when, for example, for increasing behavior, you give a reward. You remove that reward, it is possible for the habit to become like extinct because you take away the reward. So they don't want to do it anymore.
So in the study, did they focus on good habits and bad habits, or it was just they created a habit and then...
I guess in terms of the study, because they were doing pigeons and rats, they didn't look at if they were good-mannered or bad-mannered. This is a bad rat. Let's get him out of here. No, it was more like purposely creating a habit and purposely stopping a habit by reward or punishment, right? So the other side of it, extinction, is removing the punishment for a bad habit. They may start doing the bad habit because you remove it, right?
Okay, so in this study with the animals, they're taking animals who don't have an established habit. They create the habit, and then they go through multiple different methods to see how long and what methods are effective at getting rid of the habit.
Yes.
Okay, so stop me if you're going to get into this later, but I'm thinking about how this transfers to people, and I'm assuming the idea is that it's working with people's already established habits.
Yeah.
And it would mainly be used in circumstances where someone has a bad habit that they want to get rid of then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I feel like we're more on the same page now.
Yes. And I should note that out of any of the habits, partial reinforcement is the most resistant to extinction, which seems bizarre to me that I would think full reinforcement would create the strongest and more ingrained habit.
What was partial reinforcement again?
That it's not always reinforcement given.
So that was like the rat touches the light, and sometimes it gives the positive reinforcement, sometimes it doesn't.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I feel like I can understand the idea of it being partial reinforcement, because sometimes if you do something good, or not even good, but you do a habit, and then you know what's going to happen when you do it, maybe it's not as exciting to do it. But maybe if there's this little bit of, what's going to happen, the rat's interested then. The rat's like, if I touch this light, what's going to happen? But if they knew what was going to happen, they might get bored with it and be like, ugh, there's just no excitement there.
Maybe we're onto something here. We could call it the quick thought method. That you are more curious if you know that there's not a punishment, or you don't know if there's a punishment.
Well, I'm guessing this is probably what Skinner's findings say. So as much as I would love to take ownership over this, I think we'll probably have to leave credit with him. Although yay for us for being able to predict his findings, perhaps, or make sense of them.
Yes. Well, I'm glad we can. Hopefully we can make it make sense to all you guys. The schedules as well. Variable ratio is the most effective in creating a habit and the most resistant to extinction. Same sense, fixed interval is the least effective and easiest to extinguish.
Okay, so again, that goes along with that exact same thought process that when it happens randomly, it's going to be more effective than when they know, okay, in 20 minutes, I'm going to get whatever.
Mm-hmm. But still, wouldn't you think, let me think of this here. I had it in my head. Say you're working a job and at the end of the week, you get paid weekly, that after you complete so many hours, 40 hours, you get paid. What if only some of the time you got paid? I don't know if I'd want to work. There'd be a mutiny at work or something. Obviously, that might be a more complex situation that maybe doesn't pertain to operant conditioning, but
no, that's definitely an interesting thought to have. But I guess the difference with that is work is more long-term, whereas long-term and time-consuming, whereas a habit or something is not necessarily something that you do every single day for a specified number of hours a day. Yes. And so it's more of a sporadic, spontaneous thing that someone might be doing. And so in that sense, it's not such a big deal. But I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah. I think it might be too complex because working involves a bunch of different habits, right? It's not a single habit. So maybe if you dived into every single habit you create at work, you could do something.
Yeah. Well, actually, I feel like this does make sense with the work example, though, because you already said earlier that some positive reinforcement is when you get a raise or something at work, or you get a bonus, right? And so I feel like this concept works well where, if on occasion, randomly, you got a bonus because you did something really well, well, that's going to encourage you to keep trying to do things well, to maybe get a raise, get a promotion, get a bonus. But if okay, in 6 months, I'm getting my bonus, I'm getting my raise, there's not going to be that incentive for you to work harder and try to be more innovative and creative, right?
Yes. And the variable ratio, so you have fixed ratio as well, right? So that would be every single time you do something good at work, you get a raise or something like that. But variable ratio, you would only get a raise some of the time, like you were saying. And I can see, it makes more sense to me in a sports setting when you're a coach and you were teaching kids or your team how to perform certain tasks, and you would praise them some of the time. And praising them only some of the time, if they respect you and look up to you, they'll be like, oh, I'm doing this, and it'll make them take more ownership of themselves and want to improve. And they're like, maybe I didn't do good enough. I'll try harder next time.
Mm-hmm. Well, there needs to be this degree of, there's an expectation of the level you're supposed to be meeting. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that'll be rewarded, but I don't know. I actually think this really makes sense, because if you just flood people with rewards all the time for maintaining the same level, essentially, well, that's gonna, if anything, they'll start doing worse because they'll get accustomed to it, right? So, if you were just constantly getting raises and promotions at work, I feel like the quality of your work would start to decrease, because you would get used to that. You would expect that you're going to get that regardless of the work you do. And so it might go down.
Yep, I agree.
Let us know in the comments if you would work a job if your pay was not fixed, but was sporadic.
What if some weeks you got paid half your rate?
Yeah.
Maybe something like that. But yes, definitely comment. There isn't actually, I was having trouble finding reasons why. We kind of explained it a little bit, about why variable ratio is the most effective and most resistant. There was another study completed by Hockman and Arev, and what they were doing is comparing the partial reinforcement, full reinforcement, and which one was better at promoting habits. What they found was that it wasn't partial reinforcement that created the habit, but the amount of times they received the positive reward. So it's suggesting something a little different.
So essentially that's saying that it's still partial, it's not consistent, but that it needs to go on for long enough that they learn to expect it to some degree. It feels reliable to them.
Which it adds on to Skinner's experiment. Basically, the more you try creating the habit or influencing the habit, the stronger the habit's going to be.
Okay.
And what they found, or actually, I'll start with this first. They used buttons. This experiment was performed on humans. And they used buttons that were able to change the rewards. And they just had a point system for selecting one of the buttons. And the participants didn't know what the point system was, right? So they set it up in two parts. The first part of the experiment, they had two groups, the partial and full reinforcement groups. One group always got high points on one button and a limited number of points on the other. And that is the full reinforcement group. The partial, the one button had low points and the other button only got high points 50% of the time. Then they tried to extinguish the habit. And meaning no matter what, they just got low points for everything. They found there was a correlation between a lower reinforcement of the partial schedule and a higher reinforcement after extinguishing stage compared to the full schedule. What are words?
I don't know.
So, in other words, what it means is that the partial schedule doesn't reinforce the habit as much as the full schedule, because the amount of times you give them a reward is a stronger habit. But the partial had a 50% higher resistance to extinction. So I guess it's the other side of the coin, if that makes sense. That's how I made sense of it.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this, partial reinforcement on a full-time schedule would contribute to the most effective extinction or creation of a habit.
Yeah, most extinction to the habit. The partial would mean that they only get it part of the time, right? So that would be yes, you're right. It's the fixed.
Good.
And so, kind of mentioned at the start that you can use operant conditioning as a parent to help teach your kids, or what?
It just made me laugh because Julian and I definitely are not used to being on camera yet. And so I feel like in the video, it's just super random. But I feel like in the video, there's going to be so much random stuff Julian and I are doing because we're not used to being filmed. Because Julian just like, because the microphone's in front of your mouth, so you're aware of that. And he just like mid-sentence turned away and like went like made a noise so it wouldn't be in the microphone. But then I just pictured in my mind editing the videos together, and I'm like, he moved away from his microphone to get rid of the like sound, but then the video is gonna like show him moving away.
Live and learn.
Too funny. I don't know why I had to point that out, but it just made me laugh inside when I saw it, because I was like, oh, he's trying to be like considerate of the sound, but then I was like, but we're being filmed.
I'm not trying to create some was it ASME
ASMR.
ASMR.
Okay, no, that killed it. Let's keep going.
Yeah, we're talking about being a parent here, but obviously we don't have kids, so we're not speaking as if we're experts on raising kids here.
We know nothing about raising kids.
No, I would say this is more so a game plan on what we would try. Initial game plan.
Yeah. So I don't know what we're going to be talking about, but if we're talking about parenting,
yes.
I guess, yes. Good to give a disclaimer that anyone listening, we are not telling you how to raise your kids. We are not criticizing how you raise your kids. We are just discussing research findings about potential ways in which you could raise a kid.
Research findings.
And then I guess a little commentary on ideally what we would do ourselves.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff I got from the Wiley-Blackwell handbook of operant and classical conditioning. They have some stuff on parents and leadership, a bunch of stuff. It's actually quite an interesting book. Anyway, to explain how parenting can be used with operant conditioning, you could look at the behavior of a bad-mannered child. As a parent, you want to stop the behavior and promote good behavior, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Everyone can probably agree with that.
You don't want a gremlin running around. So the example I thought of was the kid acts out when you tell them they can't play video games.
Mm-hmm.
And according to what we just talked about, if you were to occasionally cave and let them play when they acted out, that habit is going to be more ingrained and harder to stop. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Compared to...
Sorry, I just kind of zoned out for a second.
This guy's like, real interesting.
I was just watching the candle like flickering, and then Lo siento.
Oh,
please describe it again, my love.
So a kid acts out when you tell them they can't play video games. Mm-hmm. So whatever, kicking, screaming, something like that.
Yeah, of course.
And according to what we just learned, because that partial reinforcement is more resistant to extinction, if you were to sometimes cave, the habit would last longer and it would promote the bad behavior longer.
The bad behavior?
Efficiency.
We are fast. We are good and efficient here. No time for two words. Yeah, of course. That absolutely makes sense. Like, I think for sure most parents would be able to agree that if you give in to your kids when they're having a tantrum or don't agree with something you're doing, anytime you give in to them, it's just going to reinforce to them that if I act in this way, if this is the reaction I have to my parents, like they might not give in to me always, but sometimes they will. And that kind of, I guess, goes with the idea that partial reinforcement is the strongest way to maintain or get rid of a habit. And so if the kid knows that sometimes if I behave this way, they're always going to want to have those kind of outbursts or reactions because sometimes it'll work out for them.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you also have to be on the same page too there, because, again, just speaking hypothetically, if one parent is super easygoing and one parent's really strict, the kid will learn to go to the easygoing parent to get what they want, right? So
I guess, okay, this brings me actually to a little bit of confusion on this maybe, because I can see partial reinforcement coming into play in more than one way here. So again, if we're going with this idea of a child having an outburst over not being able to play their video games, I guess I can see partial reinforcement of, like, if it's partial, there can be multiple avenues of something happening partially, right? So I guess my thought is which one is going to take effect, because if occasionally if these terms are hard to use in normal language, but if part of the time you're punishing them and then part of the time you're not punishing them and letting them use their video games, which one is going to be what takes effect? Do you get what I'm asking?
repeat the last part again.
Okay. I don't know if this will make sense to you or to anyone listening, but what I'm trying to say is that if a kid is doing something you don't want them to do, and part of the time you let them keep doing it, and then part of the time you stop them from doing it.
Oh, I get what you're saying. The other side of the coin.
Yeah, exactly. Because like if both things are happening part of the time, what is it that says what the learned behavior will be from it? Dun dun dun.
That is a good question. I'd have to think of that.
Yeah. We can discuss it later.
Yes, I think
After
we'll
the
have to. I'll have to
podcast.
think about that.
If anyone has thoughts on that, put them in the comments and let us know, because that is not a well-formed thought, but if it makes sense to someone and you might have a reaction to it, let us know.
Yeah. What I was going to say is kind of similar to what you're saying, is that you can't just punish kids. Kids need some type of attention, and you deprive them of attention, or like, I don't know if getting what they want is the right word, but if you deprive them of attention and just be like cold to them, they're gonna have like low self-esteem or lower self-esteem, and like not as strong of a sense of self. So just in the sense of the video game example, maybe suggesting a new habit instead of playing video games will be more effective at creating, stopping them from acting out. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. So instead of creating this really negative energy around not letting them play the video game, you put an emphasis on creating positive energy and associations with doing something different than playing video games. So when they're playing video games and then you make the suggestion that, oh, well, it's not like, hey, stop playing video games. You're not allowed to play video games anymore. But it's like, oh, hey, like, let's go do this. So it doesn't feel to the kid like you're taking something away, but instead that you're giving more to them.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and just how our brains work, you build upon other habits that you have, right? And subconsciously, like, they influence the direction you go in life.
Yeah.
So you want to like direct them and encourage certain behaviors, because in the future it's going to help them out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, consistent with how you raise them and make sure you direct them. They'll have a stronger sense of self, apparently.
I'd be really interested in whether anyone listening that does have kids, if you have read up on any of this kind of research before, and maybe not necessarily in the context of like Skinner's research, but you've read, a book or something that discusses these kind of methods. If they're ones that anyone has tried to use, if you have found them to be successful or not.
I would definitely like to know.
I think that's where research becomes really interesting, is looking at how it actually can be applied in real life and how user-friendly it is and whether it like really makes sense, because sometimes things can work a certain way in a study, but in real life there's so many external factors at play that, it's not as easy as the researcher might make it seem in their write-up.
I didn't find in the research on Skinner there if which is more effective, rewards or punishment. I would assume rewards are more effective at creating influencing a behavior, because I don't know if you've ever heard of the muddy road analogy.
I don't think so. Muddy road?
Muddy road.
Yeah.
So it's to do with like habits that are ingrained and in your brain, the synaptic pathways in your brain, and they're kind of like branching out, indicating like certain habits, and the thicker one of these lines on a brain scan is, the more ingrained the habit is. So the muddy road analogy is that it is hard to change a habit. Once you're in the ruts on a muddy road, it's very hard to get out of the ruts. But if you travel between the ruts, you can actually choose where you want to go. So it's easier to create a new habit than change an old habit.
Okay, yeah. Of course, that makes sense.
So that's why I think rewards would be more effective. The last thing we're going to look at, and I won't go too in depth in this because we already talked about the workplace. But do you have any ideas on, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
yes, you do. You definitely mean to.
How you would increase productivity at work?
If I was the leader.
Yeah. If you were a boss kind of thing.
Well, based on all of the research that we've been covering, I think I would give them partial reinforcements consistently.
Consistently partial.
Yes. That's exactly the way we like to do things.
Yeah, what I just mentioned with the kids, you need to actually have direction. If you want to be a good leader, you have to give them direction. You can't just say, don't do this, do this. Show them and create the vision in their head so they can take accountability, I guess, for what they want to do. So part of that is the partial reinforcement. And this would increase the motivation of individuals and the self-confidence.
Nice.
Yes. There was a study by Assure and Johns that they found that a restriction to whether rewards or punishments can influence behavior is relative to the subordinates' experiences with that particular leader. And a leader is more effective if he is respective.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And the other part of the other stuff they found was that the influence is also respective to the value of the incentive. So maybe that would be the size of the raise. 10-cent raise. I don't know if it's very motivational.
a year membership to the
Bean Club.
yeah, to the Jelly Bean Club.
Oh, Jelly Bean Club.
Might not be so incentive. Might get you kidnapped.
If you know that movie, leave it in the comments. The other thing was whether the incentives are properly given. So if they actually do something good and how often they're used. So don't overuse raises.
Yes, exactly like we were talking about before. If it just becomes too predictable, then it's not going to have the same impact.
The other part of being a good leader is creating a culture. And makes me think of, I've been in kind of a work culture. I've been in both. Obviously, the work teams that I've worked with where I've absolutely loved, and the environment is everyone wants to learn kind of thing. And I've also been in toxic environments where no one works together and everyone's kind of just trying to one up people.
Oh man, okay, sorry. You just did your like turn away thing to like burp again.
I don't know, we might have to cut this one out.
Yeah, for me, I'm doing work right now at the Ontario Tobacco Research Unit, and wow, I love my work environment. Like everyone that I've worked on different projects with has just been so amazing, so supportive, super collaborative, always receptive to feedback and offering really encouraging and practical feedback on your work. And it's just really, especially being kind of from academia where there's stereotypes about things being kind of like cutthroat, right? It's really nice to be in this kind of environment where the people that I'm working with are always just wanting to build each other up and wanting to author things together, and very, you know, generous with authorship to people and bringing people onto projects. There's no weirdness of like, oh, this is what I'm working on, like I own this project or something. It's just very much like, oh yeah, if you can contribute, like we'd love to have you on. So it's been a really great experience.
It's hard to tell this, but like, do you think it has to do
with the leadership?
Yes. Absolutely.
And I'm not just biased because my boss is also my supervisor for my dissertation, but 100% he's the person, you know, at the top who really feeds into and creates this positive culture at work. So if his behavior was different and cold and not inclusive or something, I think it would absolutely have an impact on the way that the employees work together. But he's such a collaborative person and so inclusive with people and supportive of ideas and new approaches to things that I think it really creates a positive environment.
I actually got a tip from one of my old coaches, and like super smart guy. I looked up to this guy, like he's pretty impressive. Like he was president of the CCAA, Canadian Collegiate Athletics Association, and just like amazing coach. And he told me, and this is probably the one thing, if someone's to ask me, what's one piece of advice that really stuck with you? It would be the best way to destroy a team is having favoritism. And if the way you can earn respect as a leader is you have to treat everyone the same. So that means don't restrict certain people in your group. I don't know if that could be because they're less talented. Give them the same amount of freedom that you would give to other people, because that can easily destroy, whether it just destroys their incentive or self-confidence. There's a lot of things, but That's really stuck to me, and I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah, I absolutely think that makes sense. You know, Julian and I both grew up playing on lots of different sport teams, and I can certainly think back to situations where on teams, I think everyone was aware of who the coach's favorites were and stuff, and it definitely did not create positive environments and collaboration and instill confidence in the players because you felt like you would never be able to compete with those other players, right? So,
Yep. Yeah, and like, not to say that the coaching style of picking favorites is like the worst coaching style. Maybe it motivates other people sometimes to be better. I don't know. But I would say it's not as effective as treating everyone the same.
yeah, I also think it has negative impacts on the favorites, though, as well. Like, maybe not in every situation, but I can certainly see where teammates then might have, you know, negative animosity built up towards the player or teammate who's being favorited by the coach. And it also can create circumstances where you kind of get in that like winner mindset, right? That we've talked about before in another episode, where you just expect that things are going to be like good always. And
You said before about expecting the praise and rewards and stuff.
Yeah.
So I would say it limits the learning of those favorite players. Like they'll just stay at the level they are. Obviously, dependent on the person. Some people are very motivated to always, and it has nothing to do with the coach, right? But the coach just ends up picking a favorite.
yeah, for sure. Anything we're talking about, there's so many external factors that can come into play. But
Yep. The last thing I will say on leadership is that you should provide updates on performance and tools how to improve. You can't just train them off the bat and like, here you go. Just let them know if they're doing good or not, and giving kind of regular updates or just like making sure you do, it kind of creates that environment that people want to learn and can fix their habits. Otherwise, maybe people are afraid of showing the negative things or things they aren't good at.
Yeah, and to build on to that, I think when it comes to positive reinforcement, there's also a value in having concrete positive reinforcement. So you're kind of touching on that, but calling out exactly what it is that that person's doing well. So they know in the future that doing things exactly like this are good versus kind of just generalizing positive reinforcement and just being like, oh, good job. But then they're like, okay, well, I just completed a very complex project for you. Was everything about it good? Are there some things I could improve? Was something about it exceptional? And so I think taking the time to actually give that concrete feedback to people is way more beneficial.
I've definitely done this a lot more in the last few years. I always look for one thing that's wrong, at least one thing that's wrong. Someone asked me to look over something. Because to me, if I don't get any feedback, it just seems like either I think they didn't even read it or that they just don't care. Whether that means they just trust me or not, it's nice to get feedback. So.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good habit to have.
But that is all the concepts we're going to talk about for today.
Ooh, nice. Well, now I feel like we're ready to make some good habits and get rid of some bad ones.
And be good parents.
Yeah. Better leaders.
Yes.
Also, a plug on leadership. Julian and I have been reading together the John Maxwell Leadership Bible. If you've never heard of it or you've been thinking about purchasing it, definitely can recommend it. It basically is just a Bible, but then it goes through and has his comments all throughout it on basically explaining how in the different stories there's examples of leaderships and how people were being or could be better leaders.
Yep.
So it's definitely a very practical book.
It's practical because he makes it's not using examples from the Bible. I guess it's based on what happened in the Bible, but it's about modern day situations that he's talking about.
Yeah, sorry, that's a
Yeah.
good clarifying point, that it's giving you this story in this context, and then it's talking about how you can actually use this now.
How is it relevant to you?
Yeah, so we've really been enjoying that.
Cool. Well, if you have any topics that you would like us to cover, make sure you let us know over the DM on the social medias or send us an email.
Yeah, and you can find our video versions of the podcast on YouTube. Our audio versions are available on every podcast platform, and we are somewhat active on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and we're still a little undecided on what's happening on TikTok. Yeah. We'll see at this point. We're pre-recording some episodes right now, so who knows?
I don't know. Maybe it just shows we're getting older, that we're just like freaked out by TikTok.
Yeah, too much is going on over there. It scares me.
We will be posting every Tuesday. So make sure to hit subscribe and set that auto download so you don't miss an episode.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this episode, and we will catch you in the next one.
See ya.
Bye.